Welcome back to Jack and Rex Tales. He couldn't feel his hands anymore. The rain was coming sideways across the field, cold enough to sting, heavy enough to blind. The barn was half gone, one entire wall peeled back by the wind like it was made of paper. And Jack Thompson was on his knees in the mud, screaming a name he had never screamed before in 50 years of living. "Rex! Rex, come on, stay with me!" The dog was on his side in the wet grass just outside the barn door. 90 pounds of the most faithful creature Jack had ever known, lying completely still, his right leg bent at an angle that made Jack's stomach drop the moment he saw it. Rex's amber eyes were open and watching Jack's face with the same calm, steady attention they had watched him with for 11 years, through firefights and field hospitals and the long, quiet dark of too many sleepless nights to count. Even now, even here, those eyes were steady. "You don't get to quit on me," Jack said. His voice broke on the last word. "You hear me? You don't get to do that!" Rex blinked slowly. His tail moved once in the mud. And then a small voice cut through the howling wind from somewhere behind Jack, high and frightened and achingly certain. "Daddy, please!" Jack turned. Lily was standing at the edge of the porch in her pajamas, barefoot on the wet wood, arms wrapped around herself, her dark hair plastered flat against her face by the rain. 6 years old, 30 pounds of courage standing in a storm. She had stopped correcting herself weeks ago. She had stopped saying Uncle Jack and started saying Daddy, the way a child says a word they have been quietly practicing in private until it finally feels true. Jack looked at his dog, then at his daughter, then back at his dog. He pressed both hands gently against Rex's side, felt the rise and fall of steady breathing, felt the dog lean into the pressure the way he had always leaned into Jack's hands, and something moved through him that he did not have a name for. He had survived 3 combat deployments. He had buried friends. He had made decisions under fire that he still carried with him in the small hours of the night. None of it had ever felt like this, because this was everything. This broken farm, this storm, this dog, this little girl on the porch, this was the whole world. It had started 18 months earlier, on a gray Tuesday morning in February, with a phone call Jack had not been prepared for, and a question from a 5-year-old girl that had nearly destroyed him where he stood. Jack Thompson was 50 years old. He had spent 28 years as a U.S. Navy SEAL, long enough that the life had shaped him the way rivers shape stone, slowly and completely, and without asking permission. His body carried the proof of it. A scar above his left eyebrow from shrapnel in Fallujah. A right shoulder rebuilt with surgical hardware after a mission that had gone wrong in the dark in ways he never spoke about. The quiet, watchful eyes of a man who had spent decades reading rooms and people and the particular quality of silence that comes just before something terrible happens. He had retired to a 1-bedroom apartment on the south side of St. Louis. He worked part-time at a hardware store. He walked Rex every morning at 5 because the habit of early mornings was too deep in him to unlearn. Rex had been his partner for 6 years in service and 5 years in retirement. A military working dog, trained for explosive detection and patrol, built for loyalty, wired for the kind of devotion that does not switch off when the mission ends. There was gray in his muzzle now, and stiffness in his back legs on cold mornings, but his eyes were still sharp, and his heart was still steady, and Jack trusted him more completely than he had ever trusted any human being on Earth. That Tuesday morning, the phone rang at 6:15. Ryan Walker, Jack's younger brother, 38 years old, healthy and laughing and full of life, had died on Interstate 44 at 6 that morning. His wife, Emily, with him. Black ice. 42 vehicles. The highway patrol used words like instantaneous, and Jack made himself read them twice so they would be real. They were never real. He drove to St. Louis in a silence so complete that Rex sat upright in the back seat the entire way, watching Jack's face in the rearview mirror without blinking. The chapel smelled like candles and old wood. People sat in the pews speaking in whispers Jack couldn't hear. He walked past all of them and stopped in front of the small girl in the front row. Lily was 5 years old. She had Ryan's dark eyes and Emily's way of going completely still when something mattered. She was holding a worn stuffed rabbit against her chest so tightly that its ears had gone flat. She looked up at Jack and said nothing for a long moment. Then, very quietly, barely a breath, she asked it, "Uncle Jack, when will Mommy and Daddy wake up?" The room closed in around him. Jack had been in firefights where the world became smoke and noise and pure chaos, and he had kept moving, kept breathing, kept thinking through all of it. He had been trained for the worst that people could do to each other. Nothing had trained him for this. He lowered himself to one knee so his eyes were level with hers. Rex stepped quietly forward and pressed his warm side against Lily's small body. She laid her hand on the dog's head without looking away from Jack. "Sweetheart," Jack said. His voice came out rough and low. "They're not coming back." Lily looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded slowly, the way a child nods when they don't fully understand, but somehow know that asking again won't change the answer. She didn't cry. That silence was the hardest thing Jack Thompson had ever survived. In the parking lot afterward, the social worker found him. "Mr. Thompson, Lily has no immediate family. If no one steps forward in 72 hours, she enters the foster system." Jack looked across the parking lot. Lily was standing near a bare tree with Rex beside her, talking to the dog in a low voice, her small hand resting on his back. Rex had positioned himself between her and the street without being told. "I'll take her," Jack said. "Mr. Thompson, guardianship involves, I'll take her." The apartment was the first problem. It had been sufficient for a man living alone, a place to sleep and nothing more. But Lily woke screaming at 2 in the morning, and the walls were thin, and the street below was loud, and the sirens made her flinch so hard her whole small body jerked with it. Jack worked 2 jobs to keep them fed, warehouse days, security nights, and came home some evenings so exhausted he had to grip the doorframe to stop from swaying. He didn't know how to comfort her. He knew how to neutralize a threat. He knew how to keep men alive. He did not know how to explain death to a 5-year-old, or what to say when she cried herself to sleep, reaching for people who were never coming back. Rex knew. Every night, before Jack could reach the hallway, Rex was already there, pressed against Lily's side, chin resting on the mattress edge, breathing slow and steady until her crying went quiet. Jack would stand in the doorway watching and feel something he had no language for. "I don't know what I'm doing," he whispered one night into the dark. Rex lifted his head, looked at him for a moment, then laid it back down beside the little girl. A farmer named Gus Whitfield made Jack an offer that spring. A farmhouse an hour outside the city, 12 acres, a barn that leaned, a roof that leaked, fences broken in 4 places. "A little girl deserves quiet," the old man said simply. "City's no place for healing." Jack drove out and walked the property alone one gray afternoon, Rex moving through the dead grass beside him. He stood in the middle of the field and looked at everything that was broken and thought about everything he had rebuilt before. He bought the farm. The first year was brutal. The well pump failed in the second week. The roof came down in November. The furnace heated the house the way a single candle heats a cathedral, barely, and only if you stood close enough. Jack fixed everything as it broke, learning as he went, watching tutorial videos on his phone in the cold kitchen at midnight because there was no other way to learn. But Lily was changing. Slowly and quietly, the way light changes in a room when someone opens a curtain. She was coming back. She ran through the tall grass with Rex beside her, both of them disappearing into the gold of late afternoon. She helped water the garden. She collected eggs every morning with tremendous seriousness, carrying the basket in both hands and delivering the count like an official report. One evening, she set a plate of toast on the table and said, without looking up, "3 eggs today, Dad," and then stopped. Her face went uncertain. "Sorry, Uncle Jack, sorry." Jack kept his back to her for a moment. His hands were on the edge of the sink, and he was gripping it without meaning to. Then he turned around. "Don't apologize," he said quietly. "Don't ever apologize for that." Lily looked at him for a long time. Then she hugged the basket to her chest and walked back outside. Jack stood alone in the kitchen and pressed the back of his wrist hard against his mouth and stayed very still until he was sure he could breathe normally again. The storm came in October without enough warning. The wind arrived first, hard and wrong, bending the oak trees along the fence line at angles that made Jack uneasy. By evening, the sky had gone the color of a bruise, and the rain followed sideways and violent, loud against the farmhouse windows like something trying to get in. Jack ran to the barn to secure the animals. "Rex, stay with Lily! House, go!" Rex turned and ran back through the rain toward the porch where Lily stood watching. Jack fought the barn alone, dragging goats into their stall, chasing the terrified chickens, trying to lash the barn door shut with rope before the wind tore it completely free. The rain was so heavy he could barely see across the yard. He never heard the beam crack. A section of the upper wall, rotted through at its base, invisible in the dark, gave way in a gust and swung down hard. Jack threw himself sideways and took the impact on his bad shoulder, hitting the ground with everything knocked out of him. He lay in the mud, unable to move. Rain hammered down. The pain in his shoulder was a white and breathless thing. Then he heard Rex. Not from the house, from the barn door. The bark was sharp and urgent, not an alert, but a refusal. Rex had come back. Jack turned his head and saw the dog in the doorway, low and fast, already moving toward him through the dark. "Rex, get back!" Jack started. But Rex seized his jacket sleeve and pulled, hard, the way he had pulled men out of bad places before, with complete commitment and no hesitation whatsoever. Jack got his good arm under himself. Rex pressed his whole body against Jack's side, an old trained movement, solid as a wall, and Jack got one foot down, then the other, and stood. They came out of the barn together. 20 feet behind them, the second beam came down. The crash was enormous. The whole barn shuddered. Jack stood in the rain, staring at the collapsed wall, and understood with sudden, complete clarity what would have happened if Rex had obeyed. Then he looked down at his dog. Rex was holding his right front leg off the ground. Even in the darkness, Jack could see the swelling starting, could feel the dog tremble slightly under his hands, not from cold, but from pain he was refusing to show, because that was Rex. That was who he had always been, the one who stayed on his feet as long as someone needed him standing. Jack knelt down in the mud. He put his arms around his dog and pressed his face into the wet fur at Rex's neck and held on. Everything he had held tightly together for 18 months came loose at once. Every night in that apartment doorway, every morning dragging himself out of bed to fix something else on this broken farm. Every moment he had stood at the edge of Lily's room, watching Rex do what he himself didn't know how to do. Every time he had told himself he was managing. All of it broke open at once, quietly, in the mud, in the dark, with his face pressed against his dog's neck. "I've got you," he whispered. "I've got you, boy." Rex laid his chin on Jack's shoulder. "Daddy, please come inside." Jack lifted his head. Lily stood at the edge of the porch, barefoot, soaked, arms around herself. She had stopped correcting herself. She wasn't apologizing anymore. Jack gathered Rex carefully into his arms, all 90 pounds of him, and carried his dog through the rain toward the light of the house and the little girl waiting at the door. The letter from Family Services arrived 3 days later. 30 days to prove the farm was a safe and suitable home. Jack read it at the kitchen table, with Rex's legs splinted and wrapped, Lily eating cereal across from him with one eye on the dog every 30 seconds. He set the letter down. He looked at the ceiling he had patched himself, the window that still rattled, the collapsed barn section visible through the glass. Then Lily said quietly, without looking up, "We'll fix it, Dad. We always fix it." Jack looked at her for a long moment. Then he folded the letter, put it in his pocket, and stood up. The neighbors came without being asked. Word moved through the county the way it always moves in small towns, quietly, through the spaces between people, without announcement. An elderly couple arrived with roofing materials and 2 sons who knew how to use them. The feed store owner came with lumber. A woman named Frances appeared at the door with a casserole and stayed to help Lily paint the porch railing a cheerful shade of blue. Jack stood on the porch the first morning watching the trucks pull in and felt something change in the architecture of who he believed himself to be. He had spent his whole life not needing anyone. He had been trained out of it so thoroughly he had mistaken the absence of need for strength. It wasn't strength. This was strength, this quiet procession of ordinary people showing up for a man they barely knew because a little girl needed a home, and that was reason enough. One evening, after everyone had gone, Jack sat on the porch steps with Rex resting carefully beside him, the dog's leg healing slowly, the vet cautiously hopeful. He watched the stars over the open fields and felt, for the first time in longer than he could remember, that he was not carrying it alone. Rex pressed his warm side against Jack's leg. Jack rested his hand on the dog's back and left it there. The social worker came and walked the property slowly. The barn was standing, the roof was solid, the house was warm and clean. At the end of the walkthrough, she paused in the front yard. Lily was on the porch steps with Rex's head in her lap, telling him something in a low, serious voice, her fingers moving gently along his ears. Rex's eyes were half closed. His tail moved slowly back and forth in the cold air. The social worker watched them for a moment and wrote something on her clipboard. The letter arrived on a Wednesday. Jack held it in both hands before opening it. Lily was still asleep. Rex was at his feet. Permanent guardianship approved. He set it on the table very carefully. He looked at the ceiling. From the back of the house came the sound of small feet, and then Lily appeared in the doorway in her pajamas, hair loose, rabbit under her arm. "Morning, Dad," she said, naturally, easily, like she had been saying it her whole life. "Morning, sweetheart," Jack said. He kept his voice steady until she turned to pour her juice. Then he pressed the back of his hand against his eyes and held it there for a moment. Rex's tail swept the floor once, twice. "We made it, boy," Jack whispered. "We made it." Spring came and the fields went green, and Lily planted sunflowers along the south wall, pressing each seed into the soil with her thumb the way her mother had once taught her, patting the earth gently over each one. Rex ran again, slowly at first, then with more of his old confidence, and the morning Lily chased him across the yard laughing. That bright, startled, purely joyful sound was the finest thing Jack Thompson had heard in 50 years of living. He built a wooden sign from white oak and carved the letters himself and set it at the entrance of the gravel drive just before sunset on a Saturday in April. Walker Farm. Below it, on a smaller piece he had worked on after Lily went to bed, he added one more word: home. Jack Thompson once believed that strength meant enduring alone, that the measure of a man was the weight he could carry without asking for help. He was wrong. Real strength is staying when leaving would be easier. Real courage is choosing one small, heartbroken child over the road that costs you nothing. And the most important battles any person ever fights are not fought on foreign ground. They are fought at kitchen tables and in barn doorways and in the quiet dark of 2 in the morning when someone small and afraid needs you to still be there. Rex knew that before Jack did. There is a dog in this world who carried a soldier through 6 years of war, and then carried a little girl through the worst grief of her childhood, and then carried them both, imperfect, mended, stubbornly surviving, all the way home. He never needed recognition. He never asked for it. He simply stayed, because staying was what love looked like when it was real. If you believe that loyalty still matters, if you believe one person refusing to walk away can change everything for someone who has no one else, then you already know what this channel is about. Subscribe to Jack and Rex Tales and come back for the next story, because real bravery isn't loud. It's a man in the mud holding his dog in the dark, choosing to get back up one more time. That's the kind of courage that changes lives. We'll see you next time.